Good morning. We're going to look at a broken axe handle today and see what we can learn from it, which is actually a lot, so stick around. So attaching a piece of wood to a heavy piece of metal and then wailing on stuff with it is an inherently problematic scenario. Wood is just not that strong and axe handles, frequently break. So there are a number of factors that can go into axe handle breakage, and everything doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, but we want to understand how the problem works so we can stack the odds in our favor. So in looking at this handle today, we're going to look first at the handle design and the wood, and then we're going to look at usage and technique, because this was actually used quite a bit before it broke, and one person managed to break it within a couple of minutes. After I had been using it that same day for a while. So it's not just important, what the wood's like, but how we use it as well. So the thing you hear people talk about most is end grain orientation. When you look at the wood at this end, you can see which way the growth lines of the tree run. I'll draw that out for you. Most commonly you see recommended to have them vertical like this. And that's my personal preference, although it's not a strong preference, and then a few people like to have it oriented the other way. But not only are those two things only so important, and they're not the most important things, like I'll take a handle that has diagonal grain or grain this way, which isn't my preference, over a handle with the grain I like, the end grain I like, if other things on the handle, if these mosquitoes are killing me, if other things on the handle are right. It only tells you that orientation. It doesn't tell you anything about the rest of the grain orientation or the rest of the way the grain runs. So for instance, what can be much more important than that is runout. And this handle had strong runout. You see how this broke? That's exactly how the grain runs, right like this. Let me draw that out on this handle. That's what the grain does on this handle. So that's called a runout. Let's say even if it was a curved handle, ideally that grain would follow right along the handle like this, so the grain would be straight through. When you get runout like this, it causes weakness. As you can see, this one broke right on the grain lines. So the more runout you have, the more likely that handle is to break. So people don't generally make curved axe handles out of naturally curved piece of wood, right? They make it out of a straight piece of wood. So when you make a curved handle, especially a handle like this which has strong curves, you're necessarily going to be violating that grain and causing runout essentially by the design. So I don't like strongly curved handles. This is much too curved for me. I tried to use this or a similar one actually from the same company, House Handle, and it was just really uncomfortable to use. I didn't like it. A lot of handles are much more curved than this. I don't get it personally, but there you go. Just kind of recarved a little bit, stuck it on the small, and just figured I'd use it until it broke. So grain runout is not necessarily a death sentence, like even strong grain runout. For instance, this axe right here has grain runout in this area that's equal to that and worse in some places. And I've used this axe quite a bit. I got it from a thrift store, and this whole area up here was totally bashed up, so someone else used it and probably abused it. Other friends of mine have used it, and it's still going strong. For whatever reason, this piece of wood is just really tough. Like, the fibers are just really well knitted together. It feels really dense. It's just, for whatever reason, it's a tough piece of wood. And you can't really just look at a piece of wood and tell that, unfortunately. But grain runout does matter, and people should look at it. It can run both this way, like that, or if you look at the wood this way, it could run diagonally like that. Let's say you made a handle out of a really big log, and the grain was perfectly 90 like this. Like the runout was that so severe that it was at 90 degrees. Now that handle is going to break really quick. Like, it would be difficult to use that axe, I think, even with a super tough wood, and not break it, because the wood splits easily along the grain, right? What you're doing when you split a piece of wood is you're dividing the long fibers of the wood apart from each other, and those lines are going to be running just like that. So that shows you how much runout matters. But even if the grain were to run perfectly along the handle, the wood is still only so strong, and it can be broken and sheared. Okay, so now let's talk about technique, because technique is underemphasized for sure and very important. So I had thrown this handle on here, And I didn't like it, but I used it some because I wanted to try out this head. I do like this head. It's a neat head. It's 5 pounds, which is unusual. Usually they're 6 pounds. And I just used it for a while. And then my landmates didn't have a maul and they wanted to borrow a maul. And I was like, well, take that one for a while. So they had it for, I think, a year or more and used it a bunch too. And then the head fell off my fiberglass handled maul, and I had to get some epoxy and put it back on. I hadn't yet, so I got this back from them. I used it some more last year, and then this year I had already used it a bit. This young man was visiting, and he wanted to get some chainsaw, learn about using a chainsaw and get some chainsaw time in. So we went up to cut some firewood. Okay, so I got him on the saw because he wanted some saw time, so he's cutting stuff up, and then I split a bunch of wood. And then I took over the chainsawing because there was some bigger, tricky stuff, and he broke this within about 2 minutes. So they had that whole history going, and he managed to break it in a couple minutes. So why? That's the question. Why? And I was fortunate enough to be there, and I didn't see him actually break it, but I saw him splitting right before that. Here's what happens, okay? So people have this misconception that you need to push the head of the axe or maul through the wood. I think it just seems intuitive or natural or, logical or something, but it doesn't actually work. You're going to swing the axe, hit the wood, and then push on it, like you're going to be able to push the head through the wood, but you can't. Now imagine taking this and setting it on a log and just trying to push the head through the wood from the end of this handle right here, right? So you're going to grab the handle, put it on the wood, and try to split a piece of wood like that. That is the opposite of mechanical advantage, right? You have a mechanical disadvantage. You'd have more advantage if you just put your hands over the head, I think, and just push on it. But if you're out here, it's super awkward. Also, what's going to happen when you do that, right? When you push here, if this, say this were a twig, like let's just go to the law of extremes here. Say this were a twig, what's it going to do when you push on this while this is sitting on a stump? It's going to flex like this, right? Now let's imagine if we wanted to break the handle, like we were trying to break the handle, what would we do? We would take it and slam it into a log or tree and just push on it as hard as we could as it hit the tree. Because we're going to emphasize that bend, and we're gonna flex this and stress it more. The head has a lot of mass and it's traveling this way, but when it hits a piece of wood, it has the equivalent of a force going this way. So now we have the combination of we're pushing on this really hard, this is hitting the stump and jumping back this way while we're pushing this way and causing the handle to flex that way, and boom, you get this. So what's the alternative, and why didn't this handle break before that? Because if you're doing it right, what you do is you increase the momentum by increasing the speed, and then you let the tool do its work. Now the difference there is that, A, I'm not pushing on this, so I'm not emphasizing this flex, and also since my grip is really loose, the whole axe can like go through this shock wave, and it can just play out. Imagine like how hard it would be to break this handle if I was not even ever holding on to the handle when the head hit the wood, right? So let's imagine I'm using this handle to whip this head into the wood, but then I basically just let go. And the handle and the head and everything is just going to kind of go through this sort of shockwave thing and play itself out. Now if I take a death grip on this, I hit it really hard and I push on it at the same time, that shockwave is going to act more against the wood versus it all just being able to play out. So yeah, you get someone that's new at wood splitting, or in this case the guy is also a strapping young lad. He's very strong, enthusiastic, and he's going to try to beat his way through that piece of wood. But don't. Okay, so here's what you do instead. What you want to do is increase your speed. The formula is mass times velocity equals momentum. So this mass is fixed, right? You have a maul, you pick it up, it is the weight that it is, right? It has the mass that it has. So the thing that you can change is the speed. So concentrate on increasing speed. Think of it that way. Next time you go split wood, just really try to like concentrate on whipping that thing as fast as you can. And then once it hits the wood, just let it do the work. Don't try to push on it. Don't take a death grip on it. If you death grip it, it's going to beat up your hands too, because you have this, heavy, massive thing on a stiff handle just slamming into a piece of wood, and it's going to send shock waves back into your hands, and you don't need to be absorbing that, because it's not going to do you any good anyway. So take a light grip, get that thing, and then just whip it as fast as you can into the wood, and you'll see what I'm saying is true. The work of, splitting that wood is done by the time the head actually hits the wood. You see what I'm saying? Like, the physical effort should be finished by the time it hits. And I think this probably leads to a lot of axe handle breakages that are basically invisible, right? They're kind of invisible to the naked eye. Unless you understand this and you can see how people are trying to really like slam and push their way through the wood. You can't do that. We're not that strong. Again, try to set a maul on a piece of wood and just push on the end of the handle. You can't. You're completely impotent. You can't do anything. It's ridiculous. The mechanical advantage of an axe is this right here. Think of it as a wheel, right? So if I move this point down here a little bit, it moves this a lot. That's the mechanical advantage of an axe. So that's what you want to be using, and not any kind of like pushing motion. Now this point, this pivot point in a body is much more complex, because we have multiple pivot points. We have our hips, our whole spine, our shoulders, our elbows, and our wrists. All of those are at play. So you can coordinate all those things to get this thing to whip, really fast, like whack. But that's another story. For now, just think of it that way. Use the handle to whip or throw the head into the work, and by the time the axe head hits, your work is basically done, and you're just hanging on to it enough that it doesn't, the tool doesn't leave your hands.